Before we dive in, drop a quick hi in the comments. It may seem small, but trust me, it really helps YouTube share this story with more sci-fi fans like us. I'd love to see who's watching. The corridor turned sideways, then the first Marine died. HFY did not look back. Looking back got people killed. He moved through the dark on sound, alone, rifle tucked tight, boots locking and releasing against the shifting floor. As gravity rolled again, the corridor screamed with false alarms. Overlapping Voreth signal burst, heat, ghosts, and the wet metallic shriek of phase blades cutting through bulkhead, plating somewhere ahead. 2 down, Scott said over comms. 3, HFY said, a pause then. Scott understood. Karen. Gone. No one said anything after that. The world became breath, vibration, and distance. HFY dropped to one knee before the first Voreth shape came through the smoke. He did not see it. None of them were using visual feed. That was the point. Sight lied under Voreth interference. Sight panicked. Sight gave the enemy something to corrupt. The alien's left foot hit the deck a fraction heavier than the right. HFY fired twice. The first round struck armor, the second found the joint under the throat. The Voreth folded, another came over it. Scott caught that one with a shock line and dragged it into the wall hard enough to break its neck assembly. Then something moved above him, too quiet for anything that size, and Scott's marker flashed yellow, then red. He hit the deck without a sound. HFY kept moving. Ahead through the noise rustles. Footsteps never changed pace. He moved somewhere beyond the smoke with the measured calm of someone walking, a room he had already memorized before. Entering it, a phase whip cracked once in the dark. Metal sparked. A Voreth soldier made a short, broken sound and went down. HFY shifted right. A blade passed through the space where his neck had been. He caught the attacker's wrist, turned with it, and drove the muzzle of his rifle under the armor seam. The shot punched through. Hot fluid sprayed across his glove. The smell hit a second later, copper and chemical burn. Report, Russell said. His voice came from ahead and left. HFY answered while reloading. 1 effective, 2 critical, 3 dead. Enemy close. The corridor opened, not a door. The whole right wall separated into black segments and became a kill chamber. Voreth soldiers waited inside, 7 of them motionless, Clear's throat, until the geometry finished shifting. Then they came at once. HFY fired into the first 2 and ran. Dry. Russell stepped out of the smoke. Between him and the charge, he wore no helmet, no visual rig, only the dark glasses and the same UED Marine combat armor as the rest of Ghost unit. He held a training blade in one hand and a dead Voreth rifle in the other. The first enemy swung high. Russell turned before the strike began. The blade passed his shoulder by less than an inch. His own knife went under the arm, found the soft gap, and opened it. He used the falling body as cover, fired the captured rifle once, then threw it into the second attacker's face hard, enough to stagger it. HFY took the opening. He hit low, drove his shoulder into the Voreth's knee, and brought it down. Russell finished it before the thing even hit the floor. 3 more entered through the left. The sound changed. HFY heard it before he understood it. A low harmonic pulse under the alarms. Voreth command frequency. Neural synchronization. The remaining enemies began moving as 1. Russell stopped, the way a man stops to listen to rain, before deciding where it will flood. Center node, he said. HFY scanned the dark by sound. Nothing. Too much interference, too much movement. Then he smelled it. Ozone. Not from the weapons. Not from the ruptured conduits lining the corridor. Walls cleaner than that, sharper. The scent pulsed through the smoke in steady intervals, synchronized with the low harmonic frequency moving beneath. The alarms. HFY tilted his head slightly. Above, he said, a faint smile crossed Russell's face. Good. HFY pulled the last charge from his belt and hurled it toward the ceiling. The explosion turned the corridor white. Fragments of metal and burning composite rained down through the smoke as the harmonic pulse vanished instantly. Somewhere above them, the hidden synchronization node died, and with it the perfect coordination that had been driving the Voreth assault. For the first time since the engagement began, the enemy movements fell out of rhythm. Ghost unit moved immediately. HFY drove forward through the smoke. Before the Voreth could recover, firing into the nearest silhouette at close range while Russell advanced beside him. The corridor collapsed into brutal close quarters violence, fragmented movement, overlapping gunfire blades, striking armor hard enough to throw sparks across the dark. The Voreth were still faster than most species, still stronger, but the synchronization advantage was gone, and humans had spent 5 years learning how to fight them without ever relying on sight in the first place. The final Voreth reached HFY from behind. He sensed the movement too late. The blade drove through his side beneath the armor plating. His suit screamed warnings into his ear. He ignored them and stayed on his feet long enough for Russell to close the distance. Russell caught the attacker by the throat assembly, leaned close enough that the enemy sensor should have read his breath, and drove the knife upward. The Voreth collapsed against him, then slid slowly to the floor. Silence hit the corridor all at once. HFY stood in the ruined corridor, breathing hard, one hand pressed to the wound in his side. Around him, bodies lay across the deck. Human, Voreth, broken shapes in emergency light. Russell stood at the center of it all, blade low, head tilted slightly as if listening for one more mistake. None came. The room lights returned. Battlefield dissolved, walls became smooth black surfaces again. Training complete. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The sharp chemical smell of burned composite still lingered in the air while the chamber ventilation systems slowly began pulling the remaining smoke upward into narrow extraction vents hidden in the ceiling. Across the floor, bodies that had been corpses moments earlier pushed themselves upright with exhausted irritation rather than panic. Karen pulled off his helmet first, swearing under his breath as he checked the impact scoring across his chest plate. 3 seconds, Karen said from somewhere near the wall. You lasted 3 whole seconds longer this time. Scott looked at him. You died before me. Yeah, but I died professionally. A few tired laughs moved through the chamber. HFY stayed where he was beside Russell, one hand pressed against the place where the training blade had punched through his armor during the final exchange. The simulation chamber prevented lethal trauma, not injury. Pain remained real. Blood remained real. Ghost unit trained that way because hesitation inside the room became hesitation in combat, and hesitation against the Voreth got people killed. Russell removed the training knife from his belt and handed it silently to one of the technicians approaching the platform. Around him, Ghost unit moved with the casual discipline of soldiers who had repeated this process enough times that even simulated death had become procedural. Nobody treated Russell differently. That had been his rule from the beginning. No assistance unless requested, no hesitation around the blindness, no adjustment in standards, especially not for him. The chamber display pulsed once. Overhead. Incoming priority transmission, UED. Orbital command. HFY glanced up immediately. Russell tilted his head slightly toward the display. Severus, he said. The holographic field activated above the center of the chamber a second later. General Marcus Severus appeared standing inside the operations center aboard Orbital Command, one hand braced against the edge of a tactical display that cast pale blue light across his face. The background behind him moved with controlled urgency. Officers crossing between stations. Sensor feeds updating across layered screens, the low operational rhythm of a command center shifting toward alert status without fully entering it yet. Severus looked at Russell once, then at the partially dispersed members of Ghost unit still standing around the chamber. I hope I'm not interrupting family bonding time, he said. Scott answered immediately. HFY got stabbed again. Twice, Corinne corrected. Severus nodded. Once. Good. Condition matters. They laughed. But something in Severus' expression had already told them this was not a routine call. Around the chamber, Ghost unit began dispersing toward the outer corridors. Armor still damp with sweat beneath the training seals. HFY remained where he was beside Russell, one hand resting against the edge of the black training platform. The image of Severus hovered above the display. Long-range detection arrays confirmed. Voreth fleet entering Council Space 10 minutes ago, he said. Severus looked directly at Russell. The flagship signature matches the Harvester of Silence. A brief pause. Surakith is back. Russell said nothing. The dark glasses concealed his eyes, but HFY had spent enough years around him now to recognize the specific stillness that meant Russell was already reorganizing possibilities in his head. How far, he asked. Current trajectory puts them approximately 48 hours from Sol Phi Prime. A sharp notification tone cut through the chamber. Then 2 incoming communication requests appeared across the display simultaneously. Sarathi Consulate. Kelt War Command. The incoming requests appeared across the chamber display and simultaneously populated across Severus' command feed. That was fast, Severus said. Russell tilted his head slightly. Put them through. The chamber lights dimmed a fraction as the connection opened. 2 holographic figures resolved above the display field almost immediately. The Sarathi elder appeared first, robed in layered silver-white ceremonial fabric that reflected the chamber light like still water. Age showed differently among the Sarathi, not through physical weakness but through an increasing stillness that eventually became difficult to separate from patience itself. He folded his hands calmly before him and regarded Russell with the quiet gravity that had carried him through every council crisis since before the Vareth War. A second display resolved into the towering form of Tark-Savin. The Celt commander appeared in full combat uniform, broad shoulders nearly filling the display. He carried the contained aggression of someone who considered waiting a temporary inconvenience. The scar tissue on his face remained visible even beneath the dense scales of his species. He did not wait for introductions. So it's true, Tark-Savin said. Dominion is back. The Sarathi elder closed his eyes. Briefly, your people continue to possess a remarkable relationship with diplomacy. He said quietly, our relationship with diplomacy is why we're still alive. Tark-Savin looked directly at Russell. Lord War, tell me we're mobilizing fleets already. Russell remained motionless beside the training platform. We detected one fleet, he said calmly. Not an invasion force. Tark-Savin made a low sound of irritation. She doesn't cross galaxies for conversation. No, Russell said. She doesn't. The Sarathi elder studied him for a moment before speaking. Do you believe war is imminent? The room quieted slightly after the question. Not because of fear. Because the Sarathi elder was not prone to dramatic questions. He did not ask things for emotion. Effect, if he asked, it was because he believed the answer mattered. Russell considered for a second before answering. I think Sirakith never moves without already understanding the second and third consequence of arriving anywhere. His voice remained even. Whether this becomes war depends on what she believes she gains by avoiding. 1. Tark-Savin folded his arms. That sounds dangerously close to uncertainty. It's called accuracy, Severus replied, before Russell could answer. If she wanted immediate conflict, the fleet composition would look different. Tark-Savin shifted his attention towards Severus' hologram. And if this is positioning before escalation, then we'll know soon enough. The Celt commander seemed almost pleased by the answer. The Sarathi elder looked back toward Russell. You knew this day would come, Lord. War. Not accusation, observation. Russell's expression did not change. Yes. Tark-Savin gave a sharp nod. Good. Because half the council spent the last 5 years pretending the Voreth problem ended at Solfege Prime. He leaned slightly forward. Lord War, if she forces this galaxy into a conflict, hesitation will kill more worlds than aggression will. The Sarathi elder spoke without raising his voice. And fear will kill more worlds than patience. Tark-Savin turned toward him. Immediately. Patience did not stop Veracun. No, the elder replied calmly. But neither would panic have done so. Silence stretched briefly between them. Then Russell spoke. We are not making decisions tonight. That ended the argument instantly. He turned slightly toward Severus. Hologram. Double long-range reconnaissance. Coverage, I want movement projections. Updated every hour. Severus nodded once. Already happening. The Sarathi elder lowered his head slightly in acknowledgement. Then we wait. Tark-Savin looked dissatisfied by the concept but accepted it with visible effort. For now, he said, the request arrived 19 hours after the first fleet detection. Not through military channels. not forced through council systems the way Sirakayath had done 5 years earlier. This time the transmission entered through formal diplomatic routing, protocols that had not been used by the Voreth Dominion once during the entire war. The operations officer at Solfege Prime checked the authentication sequence twice before forwarding it to the council chamber, then a third time, because the request carried a designation no Voreth transmission had ever carried before. Supreme Dominion Authority. The chamber was already assembled when the notification appeared across the central display. 34 species arranged beneath the high, curved ceiling of the council hall, while tactical projections rotated silently above the recess command pit. At the chamber's center, Russell sat beneath them in the high counselor's position, once occupied by Thorvex. Lord Peace had built the seat. Lord War inherited it. The title still sounded unnatural to some species, necessary to others. The chamber remained silent as the transmission request expanded across the display. Formal communication request the Voreth Dominion authorized by Supreme Tech Lord Sirakath. Tarksavan read it once and immediately leaned forward. No. The word landed with typical Celt subtlety. She arrives with a war fleet and requests diplomatic privilege. Like this is a trade negotiation. The Sarathi elder remained still beside the outer ring of delegates. She requested communication, he said quietly, not surrender terms. She requested orbital approach vectors. 24 hours after entering a realist galaxy. Space. Tarksavan replied. That distinction matters less than you think. Severus stood near the tactical display, rather than among the delegates themselves. Uniform immaculate, hands behind his back. The military presence in the chamber had increased substantially since the transmission arrived, though Sol Fei Prime was attempting very hard to pretend otherwise. The fleet remains outside direct weapons range, Severus said. Formation. Spacing is controlled, no strike. Deployment patterns so far. Tarksavan looked at him. So your recommendation is trust? My recommendation, Severus replied evenly, is accuracy. The chamber quieted again. Russell had not spoken yet. He sat motionless beneath the suspended tactical projections, dark glasses, concealing the ruined damage beneath them. Around him, the chamber carried the layered sounds of restrained tension, shifting fabric, controlled breathing, distant movement from security personnel, repositioning beyond the hall entrances. Then Russell spoke. Accept the request. Tarksavan turned immediately. Lord Duero. She came here intending to be received, Russell said calmly, refusing contact after she followed. Protocol weakens the council politically before negotiations even begin, and allowing her onto this station could get people killed. Yes, Russell said. The simplicity of the answer silenced the chamber more effectively than argument would have. The Sarathi elder watched Russell carefully. You believe she anticipated this debate? I believe Sirakath anticipates most things. Nobody argued after that. The authorization was transmitted 12 minutes later. The Voreth response arrived almost immediately. A single diplomatic vessel would detach from the harvester of silence upon entering authorized orbital range around. Solphage Prime. Minimal escort. No weapons deployment beyond standard. Security Protocol. Supreme Tech Lord Sirakech, formally requested permission to attend the Galactic Council Assembly in person. Not through holographic transmission. Not through intermediaries. In person. The approval passed by narrow majority. 24 hours later, the Harvester of Silence entered orbit above Solphage Prime. Even among the traffic density surrounding the station, the Vorath flagship dominated the tactical displays. Effortlessly, vast black, geometric in ways that made several species uncomfortable to look at for too long. Its surface carried none of the visible weapon saturation expected from a vessel of its scale. That somehow made it worse. One shuttle detached from the flagship's lower structure and began its descent toward the station. No fighter screen accompanied it, no military display. Just one dark vessel crossing open space toward the same station where the Vorath Dominion had once tried to break Solphage Prime in a single night. Inside Solphage Prime, security forces quietly sealed 3 additional corridor sectors before the shuttle even reached docking range. Ghost unit deployed across the diplomatic ring without formal announcement. Marine detachments repositioned behind ceremonial security lines designed to appear less militarized than they actually were. The station looked calm. Every soldier aboard knew it wasn't. The double doors of the council chamber slid open for Solphage Prime security. Officers entered first, their formation tight and disciplined as they crossed the outer threshold and took position along the central approach corridor. None of them looked comfortable with the assignment. Every species in the chamber understood what the last Vorath arrival to this station had caused. Then Siraketh entered alone. Conversation across the chamber faded. Gradually, rather than all at once. Fragments of discussion disappearing in uneven layers as attention shifted toward the doorway. The council hall had hosted warlords, admirals, monarchs, and species old enough to remember the founding of interstellar civilization itself. None of them entered rooms casually. Siraketh somehow made all of them seem aware of their own movement by comparison. She crossed the chamber floor with measured calm, neither hurried nor theatrical, her posture carrying the complete certainty of someone who expected the space around her to remain under control, because it usually did. The Vorath were not considered beautiful by most known species. Their features were too sharpened by engineered evolution, too visibly shaped by a civilization that valued precision over comfort. Yet Siraketh carried those same traits with a refinement that altered the effect entirely. Her skin held a pale blue tone beneath the chamber lighting, smooth almost to the point of appearing artificial. Dark ceremonial attire flowed around her, in layered panels woven with faint metallic threading that shifted subtly when she moved, as though something beneath the fabric remained active and responsive. Thin arcs of black metal curved back through pale silver hair, forming something between a crown and a neural interface without fully resembling either. Nothing about her appearance looked ornamental. Everything looked designed. Different species interpreted the effect differently. Some saw elegance. Others saw authority refined into physical form. Several simply found themselves paying closer attention than they intended to. Russell noticed something else. The air changed slightly as she entered. The chamber. Most species would never have detected it consciously. The shift was too subtle beneath the ventilation currents moving through the hull. Russell identified it immediately. Anyway, blindness had forced him to sharpen every remaining sense after the war. But that alone would not have been enough. Over the last 5 years, he had studied Vorlag physiology extensively. Respiratory systems, hormonal response, pheromonal communication patterns. Surikath species released chemical signals almost constantly beneath normal speech and movement. Most civilizations never noticed them. Russell did. A controlled pheromonal release moved through the chamber air now, carefully calibrated beneath direct recognition. Thresholds designed not to dominate emotion, but to soften resistance around the edges. Surikath's gaze settled on him almost immediately. Russell remained seated beneath the suspended tactical displays, dark glasses concealing the damage beneath them, while the rest of the chamber reacted to her arrival in small, involuntary ways. Shifting posture, interrupted breath, attention pulling toward her whether intended or not. Russell did not move at all. That seemed to interest her more than if he had. The 4-station security officer stopped several meters behind her as she reached the center speaking circle. The chamber doors sealed quietly at her back. For a moment nobody spoke, then Sira Kyath inclined her head slightly toward the assembled council. My thanks to the Galactic Council of the Orelus Galaxy for granting this meeting. Her voice carried through the chamber with a melodic warmth, easing tension without ever losing control of the room. Nothing about it sounded forced. That was part of what made it dangerous. She spoke the way some species administered anesthetic, carefully measured, impossible to notice fully until the effect had already begun. I recognize the significance of standing here again, she continued. 5 years ago this chamber stood at the edge of collapse. Several council members shifted slightly in their seats, unsettled by the memory. The Vorath Dominion has changed since that night. The conflicts between tech lords are finished. The succession wars are over. Her gaze moved slowly across the chamber. There is now one dominion, one command authority, one unified fleet structure. The statement settled heavily through the room. Russell listened to the silence that followed it. Kyath continued in the same composed tone. My predecessors believed power existed primarily to impose submission through force. I consider that an inefficient use of civilization. Tarksavan's expression hardened immediately, though he remained silent. The Orelus Galaxy and the Vorath Dominion now stand as the two dominant powers across neighboring galaxies, she said. Continued hostility between structures of this scale serves no rational outcome. She let the sentence settle before continuing. I did not come to Solufege Prime to offer surrender terms. A slight pause. I came to propose alliance. The chamber did not remain silent after the word alliance. Murmurs spread almost immediately through the delegateers. Different species reacting in different ways. Low tonal exchanges among the Sarathi. Rapid overlapping speech from the Valor cluster. visible agitation from several smaller representatives positioned near the outer rings. Even the chamber lighting seemed sharper, somehow against the sudden movement of 34 civilizations, recalculating the meaning of what they had just heard. Tarksovan broke first. The Celt commander leaned forward in his position, heavy hands resting against the edge of the council platform, as though physical restraint was the only reason he remained seated. You arrive in this galaxy with a war fleet, he said, his voice carrying easily through the chamber. After your dominion murdered billions across Aurella's space, and you believe you can walk into this hall asking for alliance. The chamber quieted slightly around the question. Sira, Keith turned toward him without visible, said calmly, that civilizations which survive war eventually face a choice between remaining trapped inside it or building something capable of outlasting it. Tarksovan's expression hardened. Further, you speak as though this was mutual damage. No, Sira, Keith replied. I speak as someone who understands that your galaxy survived the Voreth Dominion because it adapted faster than my predecessors anticipated. Her voice remained measured, almost conversational. That outcome deserves respect whether I approve of it emotionally or not. That slowed the room. Not because she had apologized, because she had not. She had simply acknowledged reality. Without defensiveness, and the precision of it left Tarksovan momentarily without a clean line of attack. Sira Keith continued before the silence could fully settle. The Voreth Dominion now controls stable transit infrastructure across 2 neighboring galactic corridors. Our military capabilities exceed those of every fleet currently operating within the Aurelius Galaxy. Energy systems capable of supporting planetary populations for centuries without depletion. Medical and cybernetic advancements your civilizations have not yet approached independently. She spoke the words without arrogance, which somehow made them feel larger. I unified my galaxy because endless internal conflict weakened it. Her gaze moved calmly across the chamber. I did not come here seeking territory. I came because stable civilizations should not waste themselves preparing endlessly for wars that no longer serve strategic purpose. Several delegates exchanged looks after that. Russell smelled another faint adjustment in the chamber air. The pheromonal balance shifted subtly toward reassurance while she spoke about stability and survival. Carefully controlled, carefully timed. Sira Keith turned slightly toward Russell. For the last 5 years, she said, I have studied the post-war development of the Aurelius Galaxy, its political structures, its military adaptation. A brief pause. Its humans. Attention sharpened across the chamber. In human diplomatic tradition, she continued, there exists a ceremonial framework in which 2 powerful houses formally unite in order to end future conflict between them permanently. Now the chamber became truly still. The Sarathi elders' attention sharpened, almost imperceptibly. Even Severus straightened slightly near. The tactical display never changed. I believe the human term for this structure is marriage. The word hit the chamber like a bomb. Several delegates reacted immediately. Audible shock from the outer tiers. Abrupt movement among the smaller species clusters, one of the Valor representatives physically lowering his data slate in visible disbelief. Tarksovan stared at her. The chamber waited. Then Sarah Keith spoke again with the same calm tone. I am formally proposing political and dynastic union between the Vorath Dominion and the Aurelius Galaxy. Her eyes settled fully on Russell now. And I am asking Lord War to stand beside me as my counterpart. Nobody in the chamber spoke. For several seconds the only sound came from the atmospheric systems circulating air through the vast council hall while the councillors tried to process what they had just heard. Russell remained silent long enough for the chamber tension to begin tightening into something physically uncomfortable. Sarah Keith waited without impatience. Around them the council remained caught between disbelief and calculation. The political implications of what she had proposed spreading outward faster than most species could process them cleanly. Russell finally leaned back slightly in the High Counselor's chair. You crossed 2 galaxies, he said, calmly, to propose marriage. A few uneasy reactions moved through the chamber at the bluntness of hearing the word repeated aloud. Sarah Keith did not appear disturbed by it. I crossed 2 galaxies, she replied, to prevent future conflict between powers that have already proven capable of destroying each other. Russell's expression did not change. Ambitious, he said. Something faintly resembling amusement touched the corners of her mouth. Yes. The chamber watched them carefully now, no longer listening to a diplomatic exchange so much as observing 2 strategists testing each other in real time. Sarah Keith's gaze lowered briefly toward the dark glasses covering Russell's eyes. I expected it, she said softly, that human cybernetic medicine would have restored your vision by now. The room shifted slightly at the statement, not because of cruelty, because everyone present understood exactly what she was referencing without her needing to say it directly. Varakoon's interrogation chambers, the retinal implants, the torture. Russell answered with the same calm he had used throughout the meeting. The damage extended beyond the implants themselves. He lifted one hand briefly toward the glasses before letting it rest again against the chair arm. The orbital trauma destroyed too much of the visual nerve structure. Replacement systems were attempted. None of them worked. No self-pity, no anger. Just fact. The blindness is permanent. A quieter stillness settled over the chamber after that. Sarah Keith regarded him for a moment longer. And the glasses? Russell gave the faintest shrug. Protection mostly, a slight pause. The remaining damage underneath tends to make people uncomfortable. Several species in the chamber shifted subtly at the dry understatement. For the first time since entering the chamber, Sarah Keith's expression changed in a way small enough that only someone studying her carefully would have noticed. Not pity, something closer to recognition. Then Russell spoke again. You studied human customs carefully, enough to identify marriage as political unification. His tone remained even. You should also understand that humans generally expect courtship before proposals. I was informed humans appreciated directness, she said. Is that a refusal? No, Russell said calmly. That's caution. Something close to genuine interest crossed Sarah Keith's expression. Caution is rational, she said, particularly between civilizations that have already survived one another. The chamber remained completely silent. Around them now, Earlier tension had carried confusion and shock. This silence felt different, focused. They were watching a conversation that no longer sounded entirely diplomatic, and not entirely personal either. Sarah Keith turned slightly, addressing the wider council again without fully removing her attention from Russell. "I am not requesting immediate acceptance," she said. "The Vorath Dominion is prepared to begin formal negotiations regarding intergalactic alliance, military stabilization agreements, trade integration and shared technological development between our governments." Several delegates shifted visibly at that. The Valor representatives began exchanging rapid, low-voiced calculations through their implants almost immediately. One of the smaller outer rim species leaned toward another delegate with poorly concealed urgency after the words technological development reached the translator systems. Tarksavin watched all of it with growing irritation. "You speak about alliance," he said sharply, "while your fleet sits armed above this station." Sarah Keith looked toward him, her voice soothing. "Would your government have trusted me enough to arrive undefended?" Tarksavin opened his mouth. Nothing came out immediately. Not because he lacked an answer, because the obvious answer weakened his own position, no matter how he framed it. Sarah Keith continued before the silence became hostile. "The harvester of silence remains outside direct tactical engagement range. My escort fleet has complied with every orbital restriction established by Sol Figure Prime Command Authority." Her gaze shifted briefly toward Severus. "Your military officers have already confirmed this." Severus didn't like being used as validation for her argument. "That does not make me comfortable," he said. "No," Sarah Keith replied. "It makes you disciplined." A faint murmur passed through parts of the chamber again. Russell listened to the room carefully. The pheromonal profile had shifted once more during the exchange, not stronger, more selective. Sarah Keith adjusted it almost conversationally, easing tension after confrontation, reinforcing calm whenever discussion risked hardening into outright hostility. The Sarathi elder folded his hands slowly before speaking. 5 years ago this chamber feared destruction, he said quietly. Now it is being asked to consider union with the civilization that nearly caused it. His calm gaze moved across the delegates gathered around him. "Perhaps the more dangerous question is whether war has truly ended or merely changed shape." Nobody answered him immediately, because nobody in the room was entirely certain. Sarah Keith inclined her head slightly toward the elder in acknowledgement. "A reasonable concern," she said. Tarksavin made a low sound that suggested he considered the entire conversation one extended strategic mistake. Russell finally rose from the high counselor's chair. The movement drew the chamber's attention back toward him. Immediately, he stood with the same controlled stillness that had carried him through war councils, invasion alerts, and the collapse of governments. Blindness had changed many things about him over the last 5 years. Authority was not one of them. "The council will review the proposal," he said calmly. "Until that review is complete, the Vorath delegation will remain restricted to authorized diplomatic sectors under Solphage Prime Security Protocol." Formal words, careful words. But nobody missed the fact that he had Still not refused her. Sirakoth studied him for a moment, longer as the chamber systems began, quietly signaling procedural adjournment. Across the outer displays. "You adapted well, Lord War," she said. Softly, her gaze lowered briefly toward the dark. "Glasses. Better than most species would have." Russell's expression did not change. "We didn't have much choice," he replied. For the first time since arriving at Sol. "Fetch Prime," Sirikith smiled openly. Small, controlled, but unmistakably real. Then she turned and walked away from the chamber alone, while the Galactic Council watched in complete silence. The council chamber did not empty. Immediately after Sirikith's departure, clusters formed instead. Delegates who had spent years sitting beside one another now spoke in lowered voices behind partially shielded translation fields, while tactical projections continued rotating silently. Above the chamber floor, some species argued openly for caution. Others had already moved beyond caution into calculation. The Valor representatives wanted access to Vorath energy systems. Several outer rim governments viewed intergalactic alliance as the only realistic protection against future threats beyond Orlia space. Others trusted nothing about the proposal at all. Tark Sovan had nearly started a second diplomatic incident before leaving the chamber and was currently demanding expanded fleet mobilization across 3 Kelt sectors, whether the Council approved it or not. The fracture lines had appeared faster than anyone wanted to admit. That was the part Russell understood. Immediately, Sirikith had not needed the Council to accept her proposal. She only needed them discussing it. The debate itself was the weapon. For 5 years, the Orlia galaxy had remained unified, largely because survival left little room for ideological division. Now she had introduced possibility back into the equation. Prosperity, security, technological advancement, stability, without endless military expansion. And the moment some species began imagining that future while others feared it, the Council stopped thinking with one mind. The internal bleeding had already started. Less than 24 hours after Sirikith left Solfege Prime, an incident occurred above Athari Station that shifted the political balance across the Council. Almost immediately, the transport platform above the station exploded during peak civilian transfer rotation when concealed charges detonated across 2 docking spines. Simultaneously, the initial blast tore through 2 docking spines and sent burning debris across the station's lower habitation ring before emergency bulkheads sealed automatically. By the time local security regained control of internal systems, more than 11,000 civilians were trapped inside collapsing transit sectors with atmosphere pressure falling faster than rescue crews could stabilize it. The first emergency transmissions reached Solfege Prime 12 minutes later. The second arrived 30 seconds after that. Vorath fleet signatures exiting faster than light transit directly above Athari orbit. Panic spread through portions of the Council network almost immediately. Several systems initially believed that Dominion had launched a coordinated strike without warning. Emergency defense channels overloaded so badly that local command authorities temporarily lost targeting synchronization across half the station grid. Then Sirikith's fleet moved not toward the station, Toward the attackers, the combat feeds reached Solfege Prime. In fragmented bursts through damaged relay systems, unidentified assault craft breaking, formation under concentrated Vorath, fire while Dominion interceptors cut through the debris field surrounding Athari station with machine-level precision. The Harvester of Silence itself never entered firing range. It remained above the engagement directing fleet coordination, while smaller Vorath vessels pushed directly into the unstable wreckage field to extract civilians before atmosphere loss reached catastrophic levels. By the time aerialist reinforcements arrived, the attackers were gone and Vorath rescue teams were already inside the station. The chamber aboard Solfege Prime watched the aftermath unfold across live tactical feeds and uneasy silence. Burning corridors, evacuation lines, Vorath soldiers carrying injured civilians through decompression sectors, while emergency systems failed around them. Tarksavan looked openly furious for reasons even he probably understood poorly. She staged this, he said flatly. Do you have proof? One of the viler delegates asked immediately. No. Then what exactly are you accusing her of? Tarksavan looked ready to answer that question with violence instead of language before deciding against it. Russell remained silent near the central display while casualty numbers continued updating across the lower tactical feeds. Beside him, Severus monitored the incoming combat footage and tactical reports quietly describing the situation as it unfolded across Athari Station. The attackers used modified council transit signatures, he said quietly, enough that only Russell and Akafer heard clearly. Clean insertion, professional timing. You think they were real? Akafer asked. I think, Severus replied, that whoever organized this understood exactly how the aftermath would look. Across the chamber, the political shift had already begun. Some species that had entered the previous meeting uncertain now possessed fresh visual evidence of Vorath ships protecting a realist civilians, while the council itself struggled to coordinate a response quickly enough to matter. Sirakaith had arrived offering stability. Less than a day later, instability appeared precisely where she could be seen stopping it. One of the outer rim delegates finally turned toward him. Lord War, the representative said carefully, if the Dominion truly intends cooperation, refusing negotiations may eventually become harder to justify. Several others did not disagree. Later, the command room had emptied, except for the three of them. Beyond the observation glass, Solfege Prime drifted beneath scattered traffic patterns, while the Harvester of Silence remained suspended in distant orbit like a second artificial moon watching the station patiently. Severus stood near the tactical display with a data slate in one hand, while Akafer leaned against the edge of the operations table reviewing deployment requests from Ghost Unit's internal network. Russell remained near the glass, listening. The station carried a different sound now than it had 48 hours earlier. More security movement through the diplomatic sectors, more ships repositioning around orbital checkpoints, more controlled urgency buried beneath official calm. Severus looked up from the slate. Eventually, so he said with quiet amusement, are you going to become a married man? Akefer almost laughed despite himself. Russell's expression remained perfectly neutral beneath the dark glasses. At my age, he replied. That sounds exhausting. Severus shook his head once. The entire Aurelius galaxy nearly stopped breathing, and that's your answer. I lost the energy for dramatic relationship sometime around my third war. That got an actual laugh out of Akefer. Even Severus looked briefly satisfied with himself before the humor faded naturally back out of the room. Russell turned away from the glass. She already knows the answer, he said calmly. Neither Severus nor Akefer disagreed. She didn't come here expecting acceptance, Russell continued. She came here to establish political division before the refusal happened. Akefer folded his arms. And after the refusal, Russell's voice remained steady. She escalates. The simplicity of the statement settled heavily into the room. Severus placed the data slate onto the tactical table. I'm ready. Russell tilted his head slightly toward him. Severus activated the display. Several transit routes appeared across the projection field immediately, highlighted alongside cargo manifests, intercepted communication logs, and partially reconstructed financial movement patterns stretching across multiple council systems. We started tracing the modified signatures used during the Athari attack. Severus said, the network doesn't originate inside the Dominion. Akefer studied the projections. Aurelia space. Severus nodded once. Smuggling routes, black market military exchanges, quiet infrastructure. Placements spread across multiple systems over the last 3 years. His jaw tightened slightly. Somebody's been moving Vorath-compatible weapons and neural hardware into Council territory long before Sirakath arrived. Russell remained very still while Severus continued. She prepared for both outcomes. Severus said, alliance or war. Akefer looked back toward Russell. She already had operational assets inside the galaxy before she made the proposal. Yes, Russell said quietly. Not surprised, that part unsettled Akefer more than the discovery itself. Severus zoomed the tactical projection outward until dozens of highlighted sectors spread across the Aurelius galaxy. We can contain some of it, he said. Not all of it. Not quickly. Russell listened to the faint hum of the tactical systems for a moment before answering. Then don't prepare for containment. Severus looked at him carefully. Russell's expression never changed. Prepare for impact. War spread across the Aurelius galaxy before the debris of Vashar finished cooling. The first engagements began less than 3 hours after Sirakath's transmission ended. Vorath strike groups emerged along major transit corridors simultaneously, targeting military relay stations, logistics hubs, and shield generator arrays with the kind of precision that only existed when preparation had started long before the shooting did. This time the Aurelius fleets were waiting for them. Humanity had spent 5 years studying Vorath warfare without pretending that next conflict would resemble the last. 1. Fleet formations changed constantly now, avoiding the rigid coordination patterns the Dominion preferred to exploit. Human and Celt carrier groups operated inside rotating shield layers built from combined Council technology, while Arconian sensor vessels flooded combat zones with interference fields specifically designed to fracture neural Synchronization between Vorath ships. The first Dominion assaulted the Kelt. Frontier failed in 11 minutes. The second destroyed 2 Council fleets. Anyway, the war became that kind of mathematics. Almost immediately. Victory no longer meant surviving. Intact, it meant surviving slightly. Longer than the other side. Severus commanded from orbital command. Above saw Figure Prime with the same cold precision that had carried humanity through the previous war. Though the scale now dwarfed anything the Aurelius Galaxy had faced before. Entire sectors moved across the tactical displays beneath his hands while casualty projections updated faster than exhausted tactical officers could fully process them. Shift 3rd Fleet 6 degrees starboard, he ordered without raising his voice. If the Dominion center commits there, collapse the corridor behind them and burn the transit lane. A younger officer nodded and transmitted the order. Across the projection field, hundreds of ships died over the next 4 minutes. The Dominion losses were heavier. The line held. Humanity's new weapons changed the war in ways the Vorath had not fully anticipated. Eric Gore alloy plating spread visual distortion across battlefield ranges, turning human strike formations into overlapping phantom signatures that forced Dominion targeting systems to split fire across false vectors. Neural feedback mines detonated directly against Vorath synchronization. Frequencies overloading linked command. Structures hard enough to leave entire Dominion squadrons suddenly fighting as disconnected individuals. And the ghost units made the fear worse. Not just one unit anymore. 7-man blind combat teams deployed across boarding actions throughout the war, moving through darkened ships without visual systems, while Vorath troops discovered too late that human soldiers no longer relied on the senses. Dominion interference knew how to corrupt. Stories spread quickly after that. Marines fighting through smoke-filled corridors where targeting systems failed. Vorath command nodes going dark moments before human boarding teams appeared. Inside sealed sectors. Ships captured from the inside by soldiers moving through darkness as though they belonged there. The Dominion adapted. By the 6th day of the war, gravitational strikes against civilian worlds were forcing human fleets to split their defenses across multiple fronts at once. 3 Council planets burned during coordinated orbital attacks, while Dominion assault groups pressed deeper into Orlia space faster than reinforcement fleets could stabilize the collapsing lines. Civilian casualties climbed into the billions again as military command structures were forced into impossible decisions: defend the population centers or hold the war front. The harvester of silence moved continuously between combat zones without fully committing to any single engagement, directing fleet coordination while staying beyond every serious assassination attempt launched against it. Then Russell changed the strategy. The command room aboard Orbital Command had gone nearly silent from exhaustion. By the time he entered, Severus looked up from the tactical display immediately. No. Russell stopped beside the projection table. You don't even know what I was going to say. I know you. HFY remained near the chamber entrance with the other 6 members of Ghost Unit standing behind him in full combat armor. No helmets. No visual rigs. Training had become doctrine. Severus looked from them back to Russell. You're thinking about boarding the single most defended ship in the Dominion. I'm thinking of ending the war. Severus stared at him for several seconds. Outside the command glass, damaged Aurelius fleet groups drifted through emergency repair formations above Sulfid Prime while fresh casualty reports continued scrolling silently across the lower tactical displays. She'll expect you, Severus said finally. Yes. And if this is exactly what she wants. Russell's expression never changed. Then she's getting exactly what she asked for. That answer bothered Severus because it sounded exactly like the kind of calculation Sira Kith herself would make. HFY stepped forward slightly. Ghost Unit 1 can get inside, he said. The new distortion plating masks approach vectors too well for standard Dominion scans to track cleanly. Severus looked at him. You're talking about boarding the Harvester of Silence during an active fleet engagement. Yes. Casualty projections. HFY was quiet for half a second. Hi. Russell rested one hand lightly against the edge of the tactical table. She built this war around centralized control, he said calmly. The Dominion still depends on her to hold operational cohesion together. Remove Sira Keith and the fleet. Structure fractures. Severus already knew that. That's why he hated the plan so much. Russell turned slightly toward him. You handle the fleets, he said quietly. I'll handle her. For a long moment, Severus said nothing at all. Then he looked toward the tactical projections spreading across the Aurelius galaxy and understood exactly how many more worlds would die if they failed to end this quickly. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded older than it had 7 days earlier. You'd better kill her then. The assault began 9 hours later inside the largest fleet engagement of the war. Severus built the battle around distraction on a scale measured in burning capital ships. 3 Aurelius fleets emerged simultaneously along the outer edge of the Carthan expanse while Dominion forces repositioned to intercept them across overlapping gravitational corridors already destabilized by 6 straight days of continuous combat. Human carriers pushed directly into the center of the engagement instead of maintaining standard defensive spacing, releasing entire waves of distortion. Plated strike craft that fractured into dozens of false signatures across Dominion tactical systems. The Harvester of Silence moved to coordinate the response almost immediately, exactly where Severus wanted it. Collapse the center corridor now, he ordered. Across the tactical display, Kelp battle groups drove forward into impossible firing angles while Arconian sensor ships detonated synchronized. Interference bursts directly through the Dominion command lattice. The battlefield dissolved into overlapping signal ghosts and shattered targeting coherence. Then the human dreadnought Hellstorm broke apart under concentrated gravitational fire. The explosion tore through the center engagement zone hard enough to blind half the battlefield sensors surrounding it. Inside that expanding debris field, a ship no larger than a transport shuttle disappeared completely. Ghost Unit crossed the remaining distance to the Harvester of Silence. Under total electronic blackout, no running lights, no active scans, no communications. Only inertial drift through burning wreckage while the war consumed itself. Around them, HFY sat opposite Russell inside the dark troop compartment while the other 6 Marines remained locked into restraint frames along the bulkhead walls. Nobody spoke much anymore. Not because of fear, because they had already spent the last 7 hours saying the things that mattered. Weapons checks finished silently. Combat blades secured. Mag-lock harnesses armed, pulse rifles calibrated for close quarters breach. Work. Russell sat perfectly still beneath the dim red emergency lighting, with the dark glasses reflecting almost nothing back at the compartment around him. The shuttle rocked once as nearby. Weapons fire rolled through the debris field outside. Then the pilot's voice came quietly through the compartment speakers. Approaching whole range. The harvester of silence filled the forward sensor display a few seconds later. Even this close, the flagship looked less like a constructed vessel and more like something carved from black stone, drifting through space. Its dark surfaces extended beyond the limits of the viewing frame, while faint gravitational distortions moved across sections of the hull where Dominion shielding bent light unnaturally around it. Boarding vector locked, the pilot said. A pause. Good luck. The shuttle struck the flagship without warning. The magnetic clamps engaged instantly against the outer hull plating, while emergency breach charges detonated through the docking seal. A heartbeat later, the compartment doors split open into smoke and flashing emergency light. Ghost unit moved immediately. Vast, precise. The first 2 Marines entered low and silent through the burning breach, while HFY followed beside Russell into the interior corridor beyond. Dominion alarms were already sounding. Deeper inside the ship, harsh mechanical pulses echoing through the metallic structure around them. Russell tilted his head slightly. 3 ahead, he said quietly. HFY heard them half a second later. Vorath soldiers emerged through the smoke at the far end of the corridor, with phase weapons already rising toward the breach point. Ghost unit opened fire first. The confined corridor exploded into close-range violence instantly. Pulse rounds hammered through black armor, while Dominion returned fire tore glowing lines through the smoke-filled air. 1 Marine went down almost immediately, thrown backward against the corridor wall hard enough to crack armor plating. Beneath the impact, the others kept moving. A Vorath soldier charged through the gunfire with a neural whip snapping forward toward Russell's throat. Russell turned before the strike fully extended. The whip cracked through empty air where his neck had been a fraction earlier. He caught the weapon arm against his shoulder, stepped inside the Vorath's reach, and drove a combat knife upward beneath the jaw plating hard enough to sever the neural spine interface beneath it. The soldier collapsed without a sound. Left corridor, HFY shouted. More Vorath troops were converging. Already, the harvester of silence was responding faster than any previous boarding target they had faced. Bulkhead sections were sealing dynamically throughout the ship, while synchronized troop movements repositioned toward the breach sectors with machine-level efficiency. She knows we're here, 1 Marine said. Through comms, Russell listened to the movement patterns echoing through the ship around them. No, he said calmly, she knows I'm here. That changed the silence afterward. Ghost unit pushed deeper into the flagship while the war outside continued tearing entire fleets apart. Beyond the hole around them, emergency lighting strobed red across the corridors, while Dominion security formations collapsed inward toward the central command sectors, exactly where Russell expected them to. The deeper they moved, the heavier the resistance became. 2 more Marines died before they reached the inner transit spine. 1 disappeared beneath concentrated phase fire during a corridor crossing that lasted less than 4 seconds. Another stayed behind, manually sealing a blast door long enough for the others to escape a containment lockdown designed to vent the entire sector into open space. The team kept moving because stopping would have killed the rest of them too. The name stayed with them anyway. Russell led the final approach himself. By sound, by airflow, by the faint chemical traces drifting through the flagship's ventilation systems beneath the smell of smoke and weapons discharge. Syracuse's pheromonal profile remained everywhere. Russell recognized the pattern immediately. It meant she was somewhere ahead of them, waiting. The assault began 9 hours later inside the largest fleet engagement of the war. Severus built the battle around destruction on a scale measured in burning capital ships. 3 Aurelius fleets emerged simultaneously along the outer edge of the Carthan expanse, while Dominion forces repositioned to intercept them across overlapping gravitational corridors already destabilized by 6 straight days of continuous combat. Human carriers pushed directly into the center of the engagement instead of maintaining standard defensive spacing, releasing entire waves of distortion-bladed strike craft that fractured into dozens of false signatures across Dominion tactical systems. The Harvester of Silence moved to coordinate the response almost immediately, exactly where Severus wanted it. Collapse the center corridor now, he ordered. Across the tactical display, Kelp battle groups drove forward into impossible firing angles, while Arconian sensor ships detonated synchronized interference bursts directly through the Dominion command lattice. The battlefield dissolved into overlapping signal ghosts and shattered targeting coherence. Then the human dreadnought Hellstorm broke apart under concentrated gravitational fire. The explosion tore through the center engagement zone hard enough to blind half the battlefield sensors surrounding it. Inside that expanding debris field, a ship no larger than a transport shuttle disappeared completely. Ghost unit crossed the remaining distance to the Harvester of Silence under total electronic blackout. No running lights, no active scans, no communications. Only inertial drift through burning wreckage while the war consumed itself. Around them, Akefer sat opposite Russell inside the dark troop compartment, while the other 6 Marines remained locked into restraint frames along the bulkhead walls. Nobody spoke much anymore, not because of fear, because they had already spent the last 7 hours saying the things that mattered. Weapons checks finished silently, combat blades secured, maglock harnesses armed, pulse rifles calibrated for close quarters breach work. Russell sat perfectly still beneath the dim red emergency lighting with the dark glasses reflecting almost nothing back at the compartment around him. The shuttle rocked once as nearby weapons fire rolled through the debris field outside. Then the pilot's voice came quietly through the compartment speakers. Approaching hull range. The harvester of silence filled the forward sensor display a few seconds later. Even this close, the flagship looked less like a constructed vessel and more like something carved from black stone, drifting through space. Its dark surfaces extended beyond the limits of the viewing frame, while faint gravitational distortions moved across sections of the hull where Dominion shielding bent light unnaturally around it. Boarding vector locked, the pilot said. A pause. Good luck. The shuttle struck the flagship without warning. The magnetic clamps engaged instantly against the outer hull plating, while emergency breach charges detonated through the docking seal. Heartbeat later, the compartment door split open into smoke and flashing emergency light. Ghost unit moved immediately. Fast, precise. The first 2 Marines entered low and silent through the burning breach, while HFY followed beside Russell into the interior corridor beyond. Dominion alarms were already sounding. Deeper inside the ship, harsh mechanical pulses echoing through the metallic structure around them. Russell tilted his head slightly. 3 ahead, he said quietly. HFY heard them half a second later. Vorath soldiers emerged through the smoke at the far end of the corridor, with phase weapons already rising toward the breach point. Ghost unit opened fire first. The confined corridor exploded into close-range violence instantly. Pulse rounds hammered through black armor, while Dominion returned fire tore glowing lines through the smoke-filled air. 1 Marine went down almost immediately, thrown backward against the corridor wall hard enough to crack armor plating. Beneath the impact, the others kept moving. A Vorath soldier charged through the gunfire with a neural whip snapping forward toward Russell's throat. Russell turned before the strike fully extended. The whip cracked through empty air where his neck had been a fraction earlier. He caught the weapon arm against his shoulder, stepped inside the Vorath's reach, and drove a combat knife upward beneath the jaw plating hard enough to sever the neural spine interface beneath it. The soldier collapsed without a sound. Left corridor, HFY shouted. More Vorath troops were converging. Already, the harvester of silence was responding faster than any previous boarding target they had faced. Bulkhead sections were sealing dynamically throughout the ship, while synchronized troop movements repositioned toward the breach sectors with machine-level efficiency. She knows we're here, 1 Marine said. Through comms, Russell listened to the movement patterns echoing through the ship around them. No, he said calmly. She knows I'm here. That changed the silence afterward. Ghost unit pushed deeper into the flagship while the war outside continued, tearing entire fleets apart beyond the hull around them. Emergency lighting strobed red across the corridors, while Dominion security formations collapsed inward toward the central command sectors, exactly where Russell expected them to. The deeper they moved, the heavier the resistance became. 2 more Marines died before they reached the inner transit spine. 1 disappeared beneath concentrated phase fire during a corridor crossing that lasted less than 4 seconds. Another stayed behind, manually sealing a blast door long enough for the others to escape a containment lockdown designed to vent the entire sector into open space. The team kept moving because stopping would have killed the rest of them too. The name stayed with them anyway. Russell led the final approach himself. by sound, by airflow, by the faint chemical traces drifting through the flagship's ventilation systems, beneath the smell of smoke and weapons discharge. Sirakeith's pheromonal profile remained everywhere. Russell recognized the pattern immediately. It meant she was somewhere ahead of them, waiting. The command chamber at the center of the Harvester of Silence looked nothing like the brutal military interiors Ghost unit had fought through to reach it. The room was quiet. Dark metallic walls curved upward into a vaulted structure lined with flowing streams of pale data light moving beneath the surface like slow currents. Beneath black water, tactical projections rotated silently across the far end of the chamber, while the distant vibrations of fleet combat pulsed faintly through the deck beneath their boots. Sirakeith stood alone at the center platform, waiting for them. No guards, no visible weapons. Only the same impossible composure she had carried into the council chamber at Solfege Prime. The surviving members of Ghost Unit spread instinctively through the room, rifles tracking every angle. Automatically, while HFY moved to Russell's side, Sirakeith's gaze settled on him. Immediately. "You came," she said softly. Russell removed the combat knife from his belt. "You expected me to." A faint expression crossed her face. "Yes." Around them the ship continued, trembling under distant weapons impacts as the battle outside intensified. Somewhere far beyond the chamber walls, Severus was burning fleets apart to keep this opportunity alive long enough for them to finish it. Sirakeith looked briefly toward the surviving members of Ghost Unit. "Your Marines are loyal. You studied us closely," Russell replied. Something about that answer seemed to please her. Then her attention returned fully to him. "You understand this changes nothing if you fail here," she said quietly. "The Dominion will continue. Maybe. And if you kill me, another war eventually replaces this one." Russell's expression never changed. "Probably." The honesty of the answer lingered between them for a second. Then Russell spoke without turning his head. "HFY, sir, if this goes wrong, you get the others out." HFY's jaw tightened immediately. "Lord, with that's in order." His voice remained calm. "Do not intervene unless you need to protect yourselves. Not me." HFY looked like he wanted to argue, but the words never came. Understanding settled across his expression slowly instead. This had never truly been about fleets, or politics, or even the war itself. It had always been about the two people standing at the center of it. Sirakeith moved first, fast enough that even Ghost Unit tracked it a fraction too late. A phase blade unfolded from beneath her sleeve in a burst of pale energy as she crossed the distance between them almost instantly. Russell turned into the attack instead of away from it, catching the first strike against the reinforced guard of his combat knife, while the impact sent a violent shock through his arm, hard enough to stagger him sideways. The room exploded into motion. Sirakeith fought nothing like the Vorath soldiers Ghost Unit had spent years learning to kill. No wasted aggression, no mechanical brutality. Every movement flowed into the next with terrifying precision, forcing Russell backward across the chamber under a storm of strikes designed less to overpower him than to dismantle him. Piece by piece, Russell adapted immediately, not by matching her speed by refusing the rhythm she expected. He fought at close range while the chamber filled with the sharp metallic crack of blade impacts. Twice Sarah Keith came close enough for him to smell the controlled pheromone output beneath the heat of combat. Even now, she was regulating herself. Even now, she was managing the room. Russell drove forward suddenly, abandoning defense long enough to force her backward for the first time since the fight began. His knife caught across her side, slicing through part of the dark silver armor beneath her ribs. Sarah Keith struck him through the abdomen an instant later. HFY took a step forward. Automatically. "Stay back," Russell snapped. Command stopped him cold. Russell staggered but remained standing, blood already spreading beneath the damaged combat armor, while Sarah Keith watched him carefully from several meters away. For the first time since the fight started, her breathing had changed. Slightly. Not fear, effort. "You're dying," she said quietly. Russell wiped blood from the corner of his mouth with the back of one hand. "At my age," he answered hoarsely. That was always the plan eventually. Something sharp and unreadable crossed her expression then. Almost anger, almost admiration. Then she attacked again. The final exchange happened too fast for anyone else in the chamber to fully follow cleanly. Russell caught the opening strike against his knife guard and failed to stop the next two cleanly. The third slammed against his forearm armor hard, enough to twist him sideways. The fourth drove straight through his chest. The phase blade punched through him hard, enough to drive him backward onto one knee. HFY moved again. Russell stopped him with a single raised hand. Sarah Keith stood over him, breathing harder. Now, pale blue skin marked by blood, spreading beneath the damaged silver armor where Russell had cut her earlier. The chamber had gone nearly silent, except for distant fleet impacts echoing through the hull. "You could have stood beside me," she said softly. Russell looked up toward the sound of her voice through blood loss and pain, already pulling at the edges of consciousness. "No," he whispered. "You wanted us beneath you." For a moment, neither of them moved. Sarah Keith looked genuinely tired, not physically. Something deeper than that. Then she deactivated the phase blade. The energy edge vanished with a low, harmonic hiss. She turned away from him, not in mercy, not in contempt, simply finished. HFY raised his rifle instinctively. Russell was dying. Ghost Unit was trapped deep inside a collapsing flagship. Outside the chamber, the Dominion fleet still outnumbered aerialist forces badly, enough that victory remained uncertain. Even now, Sarah Keith ignored him completely. She took 3 steps toward the chamber. Exit. Then Russell moved behind her fast, enough that pain and blood loss seemed irrelevant for a single impossible second. HFY saw Sarah Keith realize what he was doing a fraction too late. Russell drove the combat knife upward into the base of her neck beneath the neural crown assembly with enough force to bury the blade to the handle. Sarah Keith stopped moving instantly. The chamber went still. Russell remained standing behind her for 2 more seconds while blood spread across both of them beneath the pale command lighting. Then Sarah Keith collapsed, pulling Lord War down with her. He hit the floor hard enough that HFY crossed the chamber before the sound finished echoing. Lord War. Sarah Keith was dead. The pale blue of her skin had already begun losing warmth beneath the fractured black arcs of the neural crown. The realization seemed to move through the ship itself. Beyond the chamber walls, Dominion coordination signals collapsed into chaos. Emergency transmissions flooded overlapping channels as fleet formations lost synchronization across multiple sectors simultaneously. Somewhere outside, Severus was already watching it happen across the battlefield. The center had broken. HFY dropped beside Russell. Blood ran steadily from the wound through his chest, spreading dark across the shattered remains of his combat armor, while distant impacts rolled through the harvester of silence beneath them. Medical evac is 2 minutes out, he said. Russell almost smiled at the lie. The surviving members of Ghost Unit moved automatically, weapons still raised while smoke drifted through the chamber around them. One Marine sealed the entrance while another checked the tactical displays for incoming security responses. None came. The harvester of silence was dying around them. HFY leaned closer. Russell's voice sounded weaker now, roughened by blood filling his lungs. Beneath every word, listen carefully. Around them, Ghost Unit stood in silence, while alarms pulsed through the chamber in distant mechanical waves. Russell turned his head slightly toward them. You did well. Simple words. Marine words, somehow heavier than speeches would have been. Karen lowered his head immediately. Scott looked away toward the burning tactical displays along the far wall. Russell's breathing caught once before continuing. Ghost Unit survives, he said quietly. That matters. HFY's jaw tightened. We're getting you out. Russell ignored it. You'll take the council seat after me. HFY looked genuinely shaken for the first time since entering the flagship. No, that wasn't a request. The authority still existed beneath the failing body, calm, certain, impossible to argue with even now. Russell coughed suddenly, blood staining the corner of his mouth beneath the dark glasses. Somewhere below them, something massive exploded through the flagship structure. The deck shook once beneath their feet. The harvester of silence was coming apart. Russell's voice dropped lower. Severus will pretend he doesn't help. A faint breath that almost became a laugh. Don't let him win that argument. The strength had begun leaving him. Visibly now, tension fading from his shoulders while blood loss pulled him steadily away from the chamber around him. His final words came quietly, almost conversationally. Tell them. A shallow breath. Tell them peace was worth the trouble. The breath after that never came. HFY remained kneeling beside him, while the chamber alarms continued sounding through the dying flagship. Around him, Lord Ward did not move again. The death of Sirokith shattered the Dominion command structure within minutes. Some Voreth fleets fought on briefly out of training and momentum before realizing the synchronization network holding their formations together had collapsed completely. Others attempted retreat immediately. Several surrendered for the first time in recorded Dominion military history. Once Aurelus forces began systematically surrounding isolated sectors cut off from central coordination. Severus did not waste the opportunity. The war ended over the next 5 days through relentless pursuit operations across the remaining combat corridors of Aurelus space. Dominion shipyards were seized intact. Where possible, weapons platforms captured, neural link systems dismantled, and transported under maximum security. Protocols toward research facilities, already preparing to study technology humanity had once considered centuries beyond reach. Some Dominion vessels chose self-destruction rather than surrender. Enough survived anyway. By the end of the campaign, the Aurelus galaxy possessed more Vorath technology than the Dominion had lost in every previous war combined. The cost sat in the trillions, worlds burned, fleets erased, entire species permanently reduced. But the galaxy remained free. Russell's funeral was held beneath the reconstructed Council Dome on Solfet Prime 10 days later. The chamber looked different now than it had during Tharvek's final speech years earlier. Reinforced structures had replaced sections destroyed during the first Vorath attack, though the architects had deliberately preserved portions of the original crystal walls instead of rebuilding them completely. Representatives from all 34 council species attended. So did military officers, civilians, diplomats, workers from reconstruction sectors, and survivors from worlds Russell had never personally visited but had still helped save through decisions most of them would never fully know. No massive speeches dominated the ceremony. The Sarathi elder spoke briefly about endurance. Tarksavan spoke even more briefly about courage before appearing deeply uncomfortable with the concept of public grief and sitting back down again almost immediately afterward. Severus approached the memorial platform. Last, he stood there quietly for several seconds looking at Lord War's dark glasses resting atop the memorial case, beside the folded combat armor recovered from the Harvester of Silence. "I told you to kill her," he said. A pause. "Forgot to tell you to come back alive." Severus stepped away from the platform without another word. Akefer stood at the front of the honor escort now, one shoulder beneath the weight of the memorial coffin alongside the remaining members of Ghost Unit 1. The entire council rose together as the escort began carrying Russell from the chamber beneath the same high ceiling where Lord Peace had once died trying to preserve peace. 34 species standing in silence for the man who had carried the war for them. Outside, reconstruction ships already moved through the orbital lanes surrounding Solfege Prime. Across the Aurelius galaxy, reconstruction had already begun again. Fleets repositioned, borders stabilized. Species that had once expected extinction returned slowly to the work of surviving. 5 years earlier, Lord Peace had built the future. Lord War made sure it remained theirs. Hey there, space human, I'm really curious about your thoughts on this video. And GT, music. And GT, drop a quick comment and let me know what's on your mind, or just say hi if you prefer. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. Also, remember to check the pinned comment. And GT, music. And GT, trust me, it's worth a look. Oh, and one last thing. I've chosen another video for you. Music to watch. Just click the card here or here if you want the whole playlist. See you there.